Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we uncover the hidden narratives of the past. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and often overlooked chapter of world history: ancient African kingdoms. When people think of advanced civilizations, they often picture ancient Rome, Greece, or China. But Africa was home to some of the most powerful and sophisticated empires the world has ever seen. These civilizations thrived for centuries, excelling in trade, governance, architecture, education, and innovation. Yet, their stories have been overshadowed in mainstream history. In this video, we'll explore the rise and influence of these incredible kingdoms, from the iron-forging Kushites along the Nile to the wealth of Mali, the intellectual centers of Timbuktu, and the stunning stone architecture of Great Zimbabwe. These African societies weren't just surviving, they were thriving, shaping the course of history in ways that still impact the world today. By the end of this video, you'll gain a deeper appreciation for the rich and complex history of Africa, one that deserves to be told, studied, and celebrated. Now, let's begin our journey through time. Africa wasn't just a land of scattered tribes and small villages, it was a continent of powerful and diverse kingdoms, each with its own unique culture, economy, and political system. These kingdoms were centers of wealth, knowledge, and influence, rivaling their contemporaries in Europe and Asia. Take the Kingdom of Kush, for example. Located in present-day Sudan, Kush had a deep connection with ancient Egypt, even ruling over it at one point. The Aksumite Empire, in what is now Ethiopia, was one of the most powerful trading empires of its time. The Mali Empire, known for its immense wealth, controlled some of the most lucrative gold trade routes in the world. And the Kingdom of Benin, famous for its bronze artistry, had diplomatic ties with European nations before colonization disrupted its sovereignty. These civilizations were not isolated, they engaged in global trade, diplomacy, and military conquests. They developed sophisticated political structures, with kings, councils, and sometimes even democratic elements. They built cities, universities, and engineering marvels that still stand today. And yet, their achievements are often overlooked or dismissed. Why? Because history has long been written from a Eurocentric perspective. But today, we're setting the record straight. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the most powerful African civilizations, the Kingdom of Kush. The Kingdom of Kush was an ancient powerhouse that thrived along the Nile for over 1,000 years. While many people associate the pyramids with Egypt, Kush was a civilization that built more pyramids than the Egyptians. Over 200 of them still stand today. At its height, Kush was so influential that it ruled over Egypt as the 25th dynasty. That's right, the famed land of the pharaohs was once under the control of Kushite kings. These rulers were known as the Black Pharaohs, and they brought their own cultural and military innovations to Egypt. But Kush wasn't just about military power. The city of Meroe became a major center for ironworking and trade. The Kushites developed advanced smelting techniques, producing iron weapons and tools that were traded across Africa, the Middle East, and even as far as Rome and India. This iron industry fueled their economy and gave them a significant military advantage. Kush was also home to impressive architecture, including temples, palaces, and the aforementioned pyramids, which had a unique design distinct from their Egyptian counterparts. These pyramids had much steeper sides and served as royal tombs for Kushite rulers. Despite its strength, the Kingdom of Kush eventually declined due to a mix of environmental changes, trade disruptions, and military conflicts. But its legacy lived on in the cultures that followed. Now, let's move on to another influential African empire, the Kingdom of Aksum. The Kingdom of Aksum was one of the most powerful civilizations in African history, thriving from around the 1st century to the 7th century. Located in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, Aksum was a global trading giant, linking Africa with Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. What made Aksum so powerful? Trade. Aksum controlled major trade routes that connected the African interior with the Red Sea, making it a hub for commerce. Gold, ivory, frankincense, and exotic animals flowed through its markets, while goods from Rome, Persia, and India were exchanged in return. This vast trade network made Aksum one of the wealthiest civilizations of its time. But Aksum wasn't just about economic success. It was also the first major African state to adopt Christianity as its official religion, long before many European kingdoms did. In the 4th century, King Ezana converted to Christianity, making Aksum a center for early Christian scholarship and culture. This influence remains today. Ethiopia still has one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world. Aksum was also known for its incredible engineering. One of its most famous achievements was the construction of massive obelisks, or stelae, some towering over 70 feet high. These monuments, carved from single pieces of stone, were feats of engineering that honored Aksum's rulers and reflected the kingdom's power. The Gez script, which was developed in Aksum, became the foundation of Ethiopia's written language and is still used today. This legacy of literacy and scholarship helped preserve Aksumite history even after the kingdom declined due to climate shifts, trade disruptions, and conflicts with emerging Islamic empires. Now, let's move west to one of the wealthiest empires in history, the Mali Empire. If you've ever heard the name Mansa Musa, you probably know he was the richest man in history. But his wealth wasn't just personal. He ruled over one of the most powerful and prosperous empires Africa had ever seen, the Mali Empire. At its peak in the 14th century, Mali controlled vast gold mines that supplied nearly half of the world's gold. This wealth allowed Mali to build great cities, fund education, and expand its influence across West Africa. But gold alone didn't make Mali great. Its strategic position along trans-Saharan trade routes meant it controlled commerce between West Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. Mansa Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 is one of the most legendary events in history. He traveled with a caravan of thousands of soldiers, servants, and camels carrying so much gold that he reportedly caused inflation in the cities he passed through. Imagine being so rich that your generosity destabilizes entire economies. But Mali wasn't just about wealth, it was a center of learning. The city of Timbuktu became famous for its scholars and universities, attracting intellectuals from all over the Islamic world. It became a beacon of knowledge in law, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Mali's influence gradually declined due to internal struggles, succession disputes, and external pressures from rival kingdoms. However, its legacy of wealth, scholarship, and trade shaped the future of West Africa for centuries. Speaking of Timbuktu, let's take a closer look at why this city became one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. Timbuktu was not just a city, it was a symbol of intellectual achievement, a place where scholars, merchants, and travelers exchanged ideas that shaped civilizations. At the heart of Timbuktu's academic scene was Sankore University, which housed over 700,000 manuscripts covering a wide range of subjects, including astronomy, medicine, law, and theology. These manuscripts provide a glimpse into the depth of African scholarship before colonial disruptions. Scholars from across Africa and the Middle East flocked to Timbuktu to engage in debate and research. The city became an intellectual hub, comparable to the great universities of Europe and the Middle East. One of the most important aspects of Timbuktu was its role in preserving African knowledge. Many of the manuscripts written and studied there contain insights into science, philosophy, and history that were long ignored by Western historians. These texts prove that Africa was not a passive participant in history, it was an active center of innovation and intellectual development. Despite later invasions and colonization, the legacy of Timbuktu as a center of knowledge still endures, and efforts to preserve its historical manuscripts continue today. Next, let's explore another influential African power, the Kingdom of Benin. The Kingdom of Benin, located in present-day Nigeria, was one of the most advanced and politically sophisticated states in West Africa. It thrived from around the 12th century until the British invasion in the late 19th century. Unlike what the name might suggest, Benin had no connection to modern-day Benin, the country. It was its own powerful kingdom with a strong centralized government. At the head of this system was the Oba, or king, who ruled with absolute authority. The Oba was not just a political leader but also a spiritual figure, revered as a divine ruler. The kingdom was organized with an efficient bureaucracy, including advisors, military commanders, and officials who managed everything from trade to justice. This highly structured government ensured stability and allowed Benin to grow into a dominant regional power. One of the most remarkable aspects of Benin was its artistry. The Benin bronzes, intricate metal plaques and sculptures, are some of the finest works of African craftsmanship. These artworks, made using the lost wax casting technique, depicted kings, warriors, and important historical events. They weren't just decorations, they were historical records, preserving Benin's legacy through visual storytelling. Benin was also a major trading power. Long before European colonization, the kingdom engaged in commerce with Portuguese, Dutch, and British merchants. They traded goods like ivory, textiles, and even enslaved people, an aspect of history that reflects the complexities of African involvement in global trade. However, European interference eventually disrupted Benin's sovereignty. In 1897, the British launched a brutal invasion, looting thousands of artifacts, many of which still remain in Western museums today. Despite this tragic end, the legacy of Benin lives on in its art, culture, and the modern movement to reclaim stolen artifacts. Now, let's turn to another African marvel, the great stone structures of Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe stands as one of the most impressive architectural achievements of ancient Africa. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries in present-day Zimbabwe, this city was the center of a vast and powerful kingdom that controlled trade across southern Africa. The name Zimbabwe itself means House of Stone, and it's easy to see why. The city was constructed using massive stone blocks, stacked together without mortar, showcasing an incredible level of engineering skill. These structures weren't just small huts, they included towering walls, enclosures, and even a massive structure known as the Great Enclosure, which remains one of the largest ancient stone constructions in Africa. But Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a marvel of construction, it was also a major trade center. The kingdom controlled the trade of gold and ivory, linking the African interior with merchants from the Swahili coast, the Middle East, and even China. Artifacts such as Chinese porcelain and Persian glass have been discovered at the site, proving its connection to global trade networks. Despite its grandeur, Great Zimbabwe eventually declined due to overgrazing, resource depletion, and shifting trade routes. European colonialists, unable to believe that Africans had built such a sophisticated city, spread myths that it was constructed by outsiders. However, archaeological evidence overwhelmingly confirms that Great Zimbabwe was built by African hands, a testament to the continent's architectural and economic prowess. Next, let's explore how trade networks shaped the African continent. Trade was the lifeblood of African civilizations, connecting the continent to economies as far as Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. African merchants were not isolated, they played an essential role in the global economy, exchanging goods, ideas, and culture across vast distances. One of the most famous trade routes was the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. This vast system linked West Africa to North Africa and beyond, with merchants transporting gold, salt, and textiles across the scorching desert using camel caravans. Gold from places like Mali and Ghana fueled the economies of Europe and the Middle East, making African rulers incredibly wealthy. But trade wasn't limited to land routes. The Indian Ocean Trade Network connected the Swahili coast of East Africa to places like Arabia, India, and China. African goods such as ivory, gold, and exotic animals were traded for spices, fabrics, and luxury items. In return, Islamic culture, new technologies, and even architectural styles spread into African coastal cities, blending African traditions with global influences. This trade had a profound cultural impact. Islam spread throughout Africa, influencing governance, education, and art. Swahili, a language that blends Bantu with Arabic, Persian, and Indian words, emerged as a result of this extensive trade. African cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar became vibrant economic and cultural hubs. However, while trade brought prosperity, it also set the stage for exploitation. European powers, recognizing Africa's wealth, would later use these networks for their own benefit, leading to the transatlantic slave trade and colonial expansion. Now, let's examine how European encounters disrupted Africa's thriving civilizations. For centuries, Africa was a land of powerful empires, thriving trade networks, and rich cultures. But with the arrival of Europeans, everything changed. What began as trade relationships soon spiraled into colonization, exploitation, and cultural destruction. At first, European encounters with Africa were based on mutual trade. African rulers exchanged gold, ivory, and textiles with European merchants, who brought firearms, manufactured goods, and, eventually, a growing demand for enslaved labor. These early trade relations were complex. Some African kingdoms benefited economically, while others suffered from the growing instability that the slave trade brought. But trade soon turned into domination. European powers saw Africa not just as a source of wealth, but as a land to be conquered and controlled. Colonization led to the extraction of Africa's resources, the forced labor of its people, and the imposition of foreign rule. The political structures of great empires like Benin, Mali, and the Zulu kingdom were disrupted or completely dismantled. And then there was the looting of African artifacts. Many of the greatest works of African art, bronze sculptures, gold jewelry, manuscripts, were stolen and shipped to European museums, where they remain today. These artifacts weren't just valuable, they were symbols of Africa's rich history, taken without consent and displayed in foreign lands as spoils of conquest. Even now, many African nations are fighting for the return of these priceless cultural treasures. European interference permanently altered Africa's trajectory, but the legacies of these ancient kingdoms still endure. Their influence can be seen in modern African nations, cultural traditions, and the ongoing struggle to reclaim history. Let's now explore how these great kingdoms left a lasting impact on Africa and the world. The ancient African kingdoms may have faded, but their legacies remain deeply embedded in modern African societies. From political structures to cultural identity, their influence can still be felt today. One of the most significant aspects of this legacy is cultural continuity. Many African nations trace their heritage to these great civilizations, with traditions, languages, and even city names reflecting their historical roots. In places like Ethiopia, Mali, and Nigeria, ancient customs, art forms, and governance systems continue to shape modern life. Politics and governance also bear the marks of Africa's historical kingdoms. Many African legal traditions, leadership structures, and diplomatic practices originated from ancient rulers and councils. While colonialism disrupted indigenous systems, elements of them persist in the ways African nations govern themselves today. Perhaps one of the most important modern struggles is the effort to reclaim African history. Many artifacts looted by European colonizers remain in foreign museums, but African nations and activists continue to demand their return. Beyond artifacts, there is a larger movement to reframe history, shifting away from Eurocentric narratives and recognizing Africa's contributions to global civilization. History is not just about the past, it shapes how we see the present and the future. And Africa's history is one that deserves to be acknowledged, celebrated, and preserved. Now, let's wrap up by discussing why recognizing Africa's historical role is so important. Africa was never just a passive part of history, it was a center of wealth, knowledge, and power. The civilizations of Kush, Aksum, Mali, Benin, and Great Zimbabwe were not just great for Africa, they were great for the world. By acknowledging these advanced and influential civilizations, we challenge outdated misconceptions and reshape the way history is told. African kingdoms played crucial roles in global trade, governance, innovation, and culture, and their impact continues today. History is a story, one that has often been told from a limited perspective. But by looking deeper, we uncover the truth behind history, seeing Africa not as a footnote, but as a leading force in human civilization. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Truth Behind History. Your support helps bring more untold stories to life. And if you want to learn more about the hidden histories of the world, check out our other videos, we have plenty more stories to tell. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.